Hello and welcome back to another episode of Tech Champions. I'm your host, Daniel Beaty, CTO with AuditMax in Jacksonville, Florida. As you know, we take time each week to sit down with thought leaders and industry experts in the field of technology. We learn about them, their journey, their mission, and get their take on the latest trends in the industry. We always have amazing guests on the show. Today is no exception. Joining us from the greater Seattle area is Nate Larmore with MGAC. Nate, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah, glad you could join us. So, Nate, you currently serve as the VP of Technology Solutions at MGAC, but I know you've spent some time at MIT and had an interesting journey along the way. So, give our audience a little taste of your journey to this point.
Well, appreciate that. One of the challenges I've had over the years is people say, "Where are you from?" And you kind of have to pull out the world atlas. Growing up
Okay.
overseas, living overseas and throughout the U.S. But one of the things, I guess, for me, from a personal journey standpoint, was I got out of school, and as most people probably have when they got out of their undergrad, think that the world's just dying there to hire you, and there's that rude awakening of no, I gotta hustle, and I found myself ultimately working for a company that was based in the Federated States of Micronesia, small island nation out near the island of Guam, which in fact is where I grew up in that part of the world. It was a nonprofit, more of a ministry focused organization, but that really got me heavily involved in IT, and that's over 20 years ago. So over the years in our industry, what you find yourself doing is constantly trying to keep your expertise, keep your knowledge fresh. And so I find myself going back to school periodically, and as you noted, most recently in the last few years, finished up at MIT, and what a great privilege and an honor that was.
Yeah, that's great. That's interesting. I actually have a brother, and he and his family have spent they've been in like 8 different countries. So they were actually missionaries in Africa for years, and then they were in India and Norway and Korea. They've kind of been all over the place. So they sort of laugh. Their kids laugh when you ask them where they're from because they don't know quite how to answer that. But I mean, they're mostly American, but they're it's been a spread out kind of thing. So let's talk a little bit
I can
about
relate.
yeah, talk a little bit about the pandemic, Nate. And you actually had a great blog post, and you mentioned a line from a Paul McCartney song, "The Live and Let Die." When you got a job, you got to do it well. Why were you quoting Paul in that in your blog, and what does that have to do with COVID-19?
Well, if I could go back and redo everything, I'd be a music journalist, so to speak. Just love music, but who doesn't, right? In fact, when I decided to pick Paul as a bit of an illustration, I think few of my colleagues here at MGAC, they were giving me a hard time. They're like, "Paul McCartney, you just lost half your audience." I'm like, are you kidding me? He's one of the Beatles.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But next article, I'll pick something, maybe Gary Clark Jr., just something more current, but love music. But one of the things I like about music, and I would say the reason I will go to music or other pop culture references for the industry that I'm in, which is technology planning and consulting. We're advising Fortune 100 clients, we're advising small hospitals, we're advising major medical centers, we're advising government agencies about what's coming next, what's coming down the road. And it tends to be an intensely technical process, but most of our decision makers, they're experts in their own right, but they're not technical people. And so as a result, we find ourselves looking for other illustrations, if you will. And one of the things I liked about music is people can quickly relate to a song. That particular line comes from a title track to a James Bond movie, in fact. But there is an element, especially in this pandemic time, of what do we do? We must do something, and sometimes inaction is actually worse than a half correct action. And I think that's what a lot of our clients found themselves involved in for the past year, in particular, the first few months of the pandemic, in which they had major facilities where their employees were congregating that were either being closed or severely limited in how many of their staff and personnel could be on site. And as a result, they had to scramble for existing technologies in order to find a way to just keep the business moving. And sometimes I'd say John Lennon's even better, Paul's great, but sometimes a music lyric can grab the right attention and get us talking about the right things instead of just types of cable and types of computers. Important details, but sometimes the larger goal is really what we need to focus on.
Sure. Yeah. No, I love that. Actually, that's great. It's a great way to talk through some of those challenges. And you also mentioned that we solved some of those issues during the pandemic with some existing technologies, the things that have been around for a while. So what made it so difficult for organizations during that time?
Well, I think the easy one. I mean, the term Zoom. For those of us in the business, we're familiar with remote meetings, just like you and I are having right now. And I've been working remote largely for the past decade, and many of my colleagues do the same. But what the pandemic forced was wide, broad, huge adoption, almost overnight. And that's not much hyperbole. Almost overnight, an adoption of remote technologies. Suddenly, families were Zooming. Zooming became its own verb. We use Teams. There's a variety, Vimeo. There's a variety of different tools out there. But it was an existing technology, and oddly enough, there were various sectors. That's how we kind of view the world, because we have different client types and different parts of industry. But a lot of these technologies were already in place, and they were being sporadically used, and not quite. I wouldn't even say they were necessarily encouraged. I think in general, although a lot of workers felt that remote connectivity tools were well past due and were using them to the greatest extent possible, there was some hesitancy across many management layers that if I can't see my team, how do I know they're working? There's the in-person connection, which is really vital. And there's a lot of truth to that. But suddenly we all found ourselves, not just in the Western world, but globally, as I've got family that lives abroad and speaking with them, where they had to take these remote tools and use them not just sporadically, but exclusively. There was no other way to connect with coworkers, no other way to share files, no other way to continue work. In MGAC's world, we're in the construction management industry, and it seems almost crazy that we could not really skip a beat, but still be able to manage our projects while dramatically reducing our presence on site. Can't eliminate our presence on site in large scale construction, but we did have to dramatically reduce it as quantities were limited. So many people were allowed on site at a time. And I found it interesting with many clients and us as an organization, how we were forced to take a technology we already had, but weren't leveraging to a great extent, and basically layer our entire business on top of this technology. And our clients have done the same. Some amazing articles about the things that had to happen behind the scenes in data centers around the world to be able to get the infrastructure to a point where it could support this almost overnight surge in demand.
Yeah, no, that's great. And we did our fair number of bingo nights on Zoom during the pandemic with family from all over the country and all over the world in some cases. So yeah, and I think a lot of people kind of dipped their toe in the water, but hadn't really used it day to day. So there's the training and adoption issues and things like that as well. So you make some really great points there. Was there any silver lining to all this effort? And if so, what do you think it was?
Well, good. We're always looking for the silver lining, aren't we? Certainly, with the difficulty of the past year, and certain parts, and I'll just focus on our nation. Certain segments of our nation really bore the brunt far more than others, and some, of course, there was tragedy in their families, and some of that's very close to home, even for us. I would say, though, to find this, if there can be a silver lining, it's that we were forced to find new ways of doing old things. And I know, even the case, I don't know about you, Daniel, I've got 3 kids that are still in school. And so suddenly our dining room was converted into a schoolroom, looked kind of like a telemarketer's office in there for about
Yeah.
a year as they're dialing into school with their headsets on and everything. But I admired the way that even their teachers were forced to find new ways of doing old things. And I'd say in business as well, we've certainly done the same. So I think on this, if there is a silver lining, it's that we have found that we can be spread out as teams. We don't necessarily have to be in the same place for all events. I think there's certain kinds of activities where the in-person, the ability to see each other live, the ability to point at a document in front of us, there's just limitations to the technology, at least for now, that we still do need to congregate in person for a variety of reasons. But I will say the silver lining, especially for remote workers like me, is probably that industry as a whole has not only grown familiar with with these remote tools, but has really grown to depend upon them. Interesting anecdote: one of our clients, large campus outside of New York City. I was engaging with them and consulting with them for technology capital planning and various other strategies as they evolve and modernize their entire campus over time. Before the pandemic set in, and suddenly all of our meetings were via Teams or some other kind of remote tool. And what I was hearing from at least the CIO on campus is he said, using these remote tools is saving me like an hour a day of walking around my campus. So I can do this in my office. And, of course, he knew that feature was available in his office all along, but it was just a form of habit, to walk from one conference room to another. And suddenly he found, wow, I could sit and he knew this all along, very intelligent man, but could sit here in my chair and do all the same meetings and recover an hour of my day. Hopefully he didn't fill it with more meetings.
Right. Unfortunately, I think that's what most of my clients see is that, oh, now everyone's realized there's no padding of meetings. You don't have to walk from one place to another. I can go 10 to 11 and 11 to, there's no 11:30. It's like, yeah, straight from one to the other. So Nate,
Give yourself
one of the,
a break.
right, yeah, exactly. One of the burning questions that your blog has open is, where do we go from here? So how do you answer that?
Well, that's the $1 billion question. In fact, these days, since $1 billion doesn't seem like much, maybe it's the $1 trillion question. That's the big number now. I would say that a lot of the methods that, as very across industries, whether it be mine or others, a lot of the methods that were quickly put in place to allow business to continue moving forward were done spur of the moment. It was great to have existing tools. It was great to be able to leverage those and great to scale those out. But what happened a lot of times when you are quickly pivoting and reacting to a situation, you've got to apply a Band-Aid. And sometimes it's the right solution, but you never have any time to really figure out, how do I really want to leverage this technology? And so I would say part of where we go from here is that people say, well, business as usual. I don't think we go back to business as usual. There's nothing revolutionary about that thought. I think there's been a lot published on that. Some people are saying, is the office dead? Is the corporate office dead? I would say certainly not. That's certainly not what our clients are thinking. But we do see a hybrid forming. And it's where there is on-site presence required for certain activities, certain kinds of jobs, and maybe certain days of the week or certain weeks of the month. But that's going to probably be combined with remote work and working from home. I think the real answer to this is it depends. One of the things as an enterprise architect, a recovering engineer is what I call myself. One of the things I've noticed is that as engineers, we tend to see a solution that makes good sense for certain use cases for a client, certain kinds of features and things. And then there's this desire to apply it everywhere. And that's really not the right approach. The right approach is to provide the right tools and the right feature sets for the right tasks and the right people. And so I think part of where we go from here, and this is what we're doing with our various clients around the country, is we're taking the lessons learned from the pandemic and taking what in terms of their strategic plans moving forward, and really trying to say, how can we learn from this? How can we move forward? What's the hybrid? What does that look like in an office environment? What I'm already seeing is more hoteling. And the assumption is not that we're just going to grab people's offices, but the assumption is that your office is in your bag and you're going to probably be at home certain days of the week and then come in for certain activities. It's going to vary based on different industries. You're not going to see that in a lab environment, for example. But I think probably where do we go from here is be flexible and listen to the users. Listen to the positive feedback, the negative feedback. It doesn't necessarily govern global decisions, but it really ought to influence them.
Yeah, I love that. That's great, Nate. And I see a lot of our clients that are moving back like by department, right? So on Tuesday and Thursday, the accounting folks are there, so they're scheduling, in similar fashion to that. So I don't think we'll all be back exactly like we've been in the past, but I do to some degree miss that interaction as well. So I think we'll see it. I think you're right. We'll see it in phases and much more of the hybrid scenario. But Nate, thank you so much for being on the program today. Nate Larmore, MGAC, everyone. Nate, if you'd like to give just a bit of contact information, what's the best way for people to reach out and find you?
It's probably on LinkedIn. I think that's the easiest way. Would certainly love to engage with anyone with questions or just it's fun to banter back and forth, just like you and I have done today, Daniel. I think all of us, even though we've enjoyed, and I'm an introvert by nature, right? So I kind of enjoy being in my office, focusing on my work, but there really is a social dynamic that I think is so important for all of us. So yeah, via LinkedIn, and always happy to chat with anyone in the industry.
Okay, awesome. Thanks again for being on the show, Nate. Really appreciate it. And to our audience, I'm Daniel Beaty. We'll see you next time on Tech Champions.